The reality is that WA's youth justice system under this government is in disarray, and whilst the majority of my contribution will focus on Banksia Hill and some of the detail around that, I want to reinforce the comments made by the Leader of the Opposition, and that is that this isn't what we've seen on the Four Corners program is not a result especially or particularly of a failure at Banksia Hill. Whilst there are failures there, there's a failure in the whole system, and that is that we have a large part of the state that is effectively becoming lawless due to youth crime issues. And I agree, wait for the contribution, I agree with the Premier that if you've got children that commit very serious violent crimes, and the Premier outlined those today, you have to have those children in custody. But the focus of those children being in custody has to be a focus on rehabilitation, not a focus on punishment. And what is clear, and I'll go through this today, Premier, what is clear is that whatever processes you have in place for rehabilitation are failing, and they are failing the children and they're failing the communities that those children come from. There are too many kids, and this is where the system problem falls down. There are too many kids that are actually running around all night in those communities. If you go to Carnarvon, if you go to Broome, Fitzroy Crossing, Halls Creek, Kununurra, if you go to Newman, and particularly East Newman, you see exactly the same behaviour. There are too many kids who are not going to school. And Premier, I ask you what I would ask you, you said make some suggestions, and I'll make a couple of suggestions to you here. The first one is, Premier, go and spend a night in Halls Creek, not as the Premier with an entourage, but as, and I'm using it in the term here respectfully, as Mark McGowan, as a dad, as someone who cares, go and spend time in that community and actually just stay in that community for a night and tell me that those children are being properly cared for. Go and do that. Go and try and drive through the whole of Derby. Go and do that. Go and spend that time in those communities. Go to Carnarvon on a school day and drive around and see the number of kids, and they're mostly young Aboriginal kids. Go and see the number of kids who are on the street during the daytime with no one paying any attention to them whatsoever. Not one or two, but dozens. So do that, Premier. That's a suggestion. Just you, as I say, not with a big entourage, not with something that's announced where everyone goes in and cleans everything up for you, because you know that's the problem when you're the Premier. Everyone puts on their best display. But go and spend some time in those communities and then come back and confront your Cabinet colleagues in terms of are they working effectively? Because what is very, very clear is that it is not working. It is not effective. When I came into this role, I went up to Fitzroy Crossing, and in fact I spent a significant amount of time in the whole, well, not just Fitzroy Crossing, the Fitzroy Valley, all of the communities along there. And then I've been back there more recently. I can tell you, Premier, whatever your ministers tell you about their programs and how many glossy brochures they've got, those programs are not working, because all of those communities, if you go from Broome all the way through to Kununurra, all of them are substantially worse, with substantially greater crime. And as I say, one of the things you could do if you wanted to distract youth from going into crime is to give them jobs. Reopen the Aboriginal Workforce Development Centres that your government closed, that our government established, that your government closed. The Aboriginal Workforce Development Centres in Broome, Geraldton, Kalgoorlie, Bunbury and in Perth. You closed those. That was a way of diverting people from crime. Instead, those centres were closed by you. Now, Banksia Hill should be properly handling the youth, and its existence should be primarily for rehabilitation. And it's quite clear that that is not the case. We heard the shocking details of how children are treated within that centre. But what is clear, and I was really disappointed that the Minister repeated his statement today. Obviously we want a safe community, and obviously we want correctional officers working in those facilities to be safe, and we have great respect for the enormous complexity of the job that they have to carry out. However, the priority has to be, and the absolute priority has to be, on making sure not only are these children put in a condition where the community is safe, but these children, as much as is humanly possible, are rehabilitated and given a productive and meaningful life. Now, it's come to the obviously to the point that some of those children moved into casuarina, and again, we understand that you need to look out for the safety of staff. However, it is a symptom. It is a symptom of a facility that is not working. That's not a solution to the problem at Banksia Hill. It's a symptom that Banksia Hill is not working properly. Now, as was alluded to by the Leader of the Opposition, and because of questions asked by my colleague, the Honourable Peter Collier, who's the Shadow Minister for Corrective Services in the other place, of the prisoners in casuarina, 298 of the prisoners in casuarina, 298 members, were previous inmates in Banksia Hill. 298. That's a quarter of the capacity of casuarina is occupied by youth who came through Banksia Hill. That's a measure of the failure of Banksia Hill to rehabilitate those children. And those children have gone on to adult crime and are going to lead unproductive lives in the great majority of cases. Now, and that's, as I said, casuarina's got a capacity of around 1,200 people. Now, out of the 571 children over the last 12-month period, or the period I looked at, housed at Banksia Hill, 405 are Aboriginal children. Now, by my reckoning, Aboriginal children represent about 1/30th of the 3% of the child population in the state. But they represent somewhere around, over 70% of the population in Banksia Hill. You know, Premier, if you can tell me that that is a symbol of how your system is working, then I'll be dumbfounded. They are terrible statistics. Now, under this government's care, unfortunately, and they are under government care, they are effectively wards of the state because they're under the complete government's care. These children are coming out of that corrective system not rehabilitated, but in fact, as some people have indicated, perhaps even demonstrating even more criminal behaviour. Another measure of how that facility is failing, and failing to inspire those children with a purpose in life, with hope in life, is that there were over 351 self-harm and suicide attempts in that facility, and that's pretty much an event every day of the year. And so these are children who feel they have no hope, there is no future, there's no option, and for a number of them that ending their life is better than continuing it. And that is a devastating situation. Now, a lot of those children obviously do come, and obviously the great majority of those children come from desperate family situations. What is this government doing? And this is the whole of system. What is this government doing to effectively deal with those family situations? I'm serious, Premier, in going to these towns, but also go and meet the women in some of these communities, these remote communities. Go and spend time with the women. Again, not with an entourage, just you and maybe an offsider, and spend some time with the women in those communities and listen to them and listen to their stories and listen to what they tell you, because they will tell you what they've told me, and that is that the programs do not work. There might be big offices, there might be lots of people employed in different roles, but it's not hitting the ground in the communities and in their communities. Now, the whole issue of mental health, and we've heard the Minister talk about this, but clearly it is not working, Minister. Clearly the approach you're taking is not working, where we see such terrible outcomes. There's a cycle of hopelessness for those children who are in custody. We don't need more programs, we don't need more spin from the government. We do need the government to take a hard look at this whole problem. And the point raised by the Leader of the Opposition, Premier, if you're sitting around a room with people, you've made it very clear, you've made it clear publicly, and you've made it clear in this place that you believe that your government is doing the right thing. You've said, well, if people can come forward with solutions, well, tell me. Well, I've already made some suggestions to you, but if people can come forward with some solutions, tell me. But essentially, we've got this all under control. I've got this all under control. And you're going to get a hand-picked group of people that are going to come in, and then you're going to stare them down and see if they've got anything to offer you. That isn't an inquiry that's going to reveal anything. You may get a couple of suggestions out of that group. What we need and what this state needs is a whole system inquiry. Why are so many of those children entering the criminal justice system? Why are there so many dysfunctional families in those communities? And why is it getting worse? Because, as I say, I've got out, and particularly to the north of this state, as much as I possibly can. I've done it on a number of occasions since I've been in this role. And distressingly, every time I've gone back to those communities, it's worse. Not better, worse, substantially worse. Fitzroy Crossing, which was a town which had introduced, within the community there, had introduced mid-strength alcohol. They had the first generation of children who were coming through to the schools for about 3 generations that didn't have FASD because they had that under control. That community, in terms of youth crime, is now out of control. Elders are now getting beaten up in that community. Go and talk to the elders in that community. As I said, not with an entourage, the elders in Fitzroy Crossing. And I'm not going to be distracted by you, Minister. I'm not, Minister, you should get out and look at the communities as well. The government have announced that they're The government has announced that they are going to build non-country rehabilitation alternative to Banksia Hill, but what do we hear? Again, like all of the Labor projects, that is again delayed. So we have a situation where the government its programs are completely failing in preventing children entering into the criminal justice system in the first place, but also a system that is failing those children once they come into the government's care and into custody. And it's not that there haven't been reviews and comment on this. Now, under the previous Liberal government, there were major redevelopments undertaken at Banksia Hill in 2010-2012. The government have now announced, after 5.5 years, that they're going to do something, but we haven't seen those come through. And as I say, this government has an appalling record on delivering any services. Now, in 2017, when we had the first year of this government, the Inspector of Custodial Services released a report which cited some major key findings. Now, one was about staff morale and people being disempowered. It was also critical about incidents and so on. Where was the substantive response of this government to that report? That was at the start of your term. Now, that report found that the overall behavioural management practice at Banksia Hill had been inconsistent, inexplicit and ineffective. Where was the response of this minister and this government to that report? Now, in 2018, the the Inspector of Custodial Services did a review of that, and what that report found was that there hadn't been significant change under the tenure of this government. Now, in the 2021 Inspector of Custodial Services overview, I mean, this must give you a hint, and should have given the Premier a hint and the Minister a hint. The title of the report was, in terms of the inspection of the intensive support unit of Banksia Hill, was Banksia Hill Detention Centre once again in crisis. So for the Minister to come in here and say that he shouldn't have had concerns, the Minister should have had concerns. This government are failing a whole generation of youth in the north of this state, and the Banksia Hill Detention Centre is failing the youth that are detained there. It is not a rehabilitation centre, it is a punitive centre. A disturbingly large percentage of the children that attend that centre are effectively going directly into adult correction facilities after a brief stint back in their community. That is why, Premier, we need you to instigate an independent, wide-ranging inquiry.
Thank you, Leader of the Liberal Party.